I'm Ash, but you can call me Icon for short. When I was in middle school, I would often spend time in my parents' basement, where we had a big widescreen TV that was connected to our family Netflix account. I used to browse through there for hours, looking for a mildly interesting show, and one day I stumbled on this show I'd heard of before, but never seen. Star Trek. The original series was enthralling to me as it explored history, sociology, and the human psyche, with a distinct style and a hopeful attitude toward the future. Gene Roddenberry, the big name behind the Star Trek franchise, wanted to depict the best of humanity in a setting where all the big societal problems had mostly been solved. I remember hearing stories about how the show depicting a Russian character during the Cold War was an intentional depiction of how even feuds like that between the Soviet Union and the United States were ultimately impermanent. I was made aware much later that Nichelle Nichols, the actress who played Lieutenant Uhura, was personally encouraged to stay in the role by Martin Luther King Jr. himself. Seeing a black person treated pretty much the same as any other crew member on this starship, treated like she was normal, was a powerful political statement during the 60s. Roddenberry's vision of the future of humanity, as shown in Star Trek, was an attempt to show us what humanity was capable of when we were past things like poverty, scarcity, and international conflict. It was a future for us all to look forward to, something we could believe in and work toward, a collective imagining of a better world that existed not in spite of human nature, but precisely because of it. The original show, which ended after only 3 seasons, was followed by its successor, The Next Generation. The Next Generation was, in most respects, a reboot of the original series, with an upgraded look for the future. The original series has a very dated set design to our modern eyes, with lots of knobs and dials and physical buttons, and The Next Generation sought to give us a modernized take on this futuristic setting. The bold colors and physical controls were replaced with a more sleek, minimalist design, with fewer vibrant colors and smoother surfaces. It took the bold look of the original show and made it more like something people might actually build in the future, taking this dream of human progress and grounding it in something closer to reality. The Next Generation is my absolute favorite of the Star Trek series, hands down. The original series has a very dated look and is much more obviously showing its age in retrospect, with some odd pseudoscience and fairly blatant sexism passing itself off as depictions of truth and simple human nature. The Next Generation isn't devoid of such issues, but they tend to be less noticeable as the series progresses, and the positive qualities are amplified. The senior staff in TNG has a great chemistry, and they all have interesting dynamics with one another. Captain Picard is a diplomat and student of the humanities, which gives him interesting dynamics with the ship's empathic Betazoid counselor, Deanna Troi, android science officer, Lieutenant Commander Data, stubborn chief medical officer, Dr. Beverly Crusher, Klingon chief of security, Lieutenant Worf, and his loyal and trustworthy first officer, Commander Riker. These characters all have qualities that play off each other very well, and these people are all friends at the end of the day, despite any disagreements or conflict. The senior staff all play poker together as a regular ritual, and these scenes often give them moments to bounce off each other in interesting ways, while highlighting that this is all in good fun. The idealism of Roddenberry's vision is most clear in Picard himself, a dedicated Starfleet captain who is unwavering in his convictions. Picard is the mouthpiece for the show's philosophy, regularly giving impassioned speeches about doing the right thing, about respecting individual rights, and not letting tactics and politics get in the way of standing up for your principles. Picard defends Data's rights in court, working to prove his sentience to ensure his autonomy is respected. Picard makes gestures of good faith to hostile powers, and always tries to prioritize the principles the Federation espouses over his own safety. He makes every effort to resolve disputes and misunderstandings peacefully, with the utmost respect for other life forms.
Let's hope we don't have to use them.
I beg your pardon?
If we can possibly avoid firing on it, then I would hope
Aren't
we
you
would be...
going to kill it?
We're not hunters, Doctor, nor is it our role to exact revenge.
What do you propose?
I don't deny that it may be necessary to fire on it, but I look on that as a last resort.
Why? Why not just kill it?
If we can determine what its needs are, we might find other sources to supply it.
Its needs are to slaughter people by the thousands. It is nothing but a giant killing machine.
Doctor, the sperm whale on Earth devours millions of cuttlefish as it roams the oceans. It is not evil, it is feeding. The same may be true of the entity.
That would be small comfort for those who have died to feed it.
I would argue that the crystalline entity has as much right to be here as we do.
The show tries to focus on big ideas, and doing that requires certain material and social concerns be irrelevant most of the time. There is no scarcity on the Enterprise. You can get equipment and food and parts from replicators, instantly transport anywhere, have free access to medical treatment and therapy, and most wounds and diseases can be healed in seconds without needing to do so much as break skin. Anything the Enterprise can't replicate, they can always go get. It's a starship, they can go anywhere to get anything they need, and they're never more than a few days away from the nearest starbase. Homesickness is virtually non-existent because you can visit any place anytime in the ship's holodecks, living out stories or simply visiting another location in a simulated world. Even worrying about risking innocent life is irrelevant most of the time. The ship has some families on board, but the vast majority of people on the Enterprise are officers who've agreed to lay down their lives should it be necessary. Command structures alleviate interpersonal disputes, since people can simply be ordered to cut it out and have no choice but to either obey their superior officer or be disciplined. The ship is always peaceful, and everyone has anything they could ever want, with no more than a week or two's delay at most. All of that is necessary to make sure that the show can be about big ideas, because material concerns can confound any point you might try to make. If supplies are limited, if pervasive biases and bigotries influence people's judgment, if people have material interests that could affect their judgment, then we can't examine these ideas as easily. If someone can be bribed, then there's nothing to tell us about human nature there. But if they couldn't care less about a bribe, then their decisions become all the more interesting. Instead of desperation, we can see avarice, short-sightedness, bigotry, or obsession as the causes of people's mistakes and poor decisions. The mobility of the Enterprise in TNG is central to the episodic nature of its stories. The ship visits new locations, takes on new passengers, and never has to stick around any one place too long. This helps a lot with pacing and novelty. The crew can be confronted by new challenges, new threats, new discoveries every episode, and this gives the show a lot of opportunities for variety and creativity. One episode, the Enterprise might be near the neutral zone, in a tense moment with one or two Romulan warbirds. The next, they'll find a new life form the size of a starship. The next, they'll visit a planet whose cultural practices resemble part of Earth's past. The kinds of stories that can be told vary a lot, and the short-term nature of the Enterprise's involvement allows them to often play the role of a disinterested third party or neutral arbiter. Deep Space Nine was the next show I watched after TNG, and at first I really didn't like it as much. I couldn't quite pin down why. It wasn't bad writing necessarily, the show was interesting and explored a lot of cool concepts. I have a pretty good idea why that was the case now, and in an odd way, it all comes down to the fact that the show is set on a space station. Deep Space Nine has a much more diverse main cast than the other Star Trek shows, not in terms of real-world race or ethnicity, but in terms of in-universe races and political interests. Starfleet has come to handle the operation of a former Cardassian space station orbiting Bajor, a planet the Cardassian military has occupied up until this point. Commander Benjamin Sisko is assigned to the station as its commander, with Chief Medical Officer Julian Bashir, returning character Chief of Operations Miles O'Brien, and Science Officer Jadzia Dax, all Starfleet personnel who are there to help with running the station while Bajor gets back on its feet. Major Kira Nerys is Sisko's first officer, a former freedom fighter and representative of Bajoran interests in the station's operation, as well as a sort of liaison to the Federation. The Chief of Security is Odo, a shapeshifter with no real allegiance to any government, who only cares about maintaining order. He served as security chief under the Cardassian occupation for a time, but the Bajorans trust him to be fair and impartial in matters of law. This group of senior staff all have very different interests here. Odo, the chief of security, is partially at odds with both the Federation and the Bajorans. His sense of justice is often too measured for understandably outraged Bajorans, but his methods explicitly violate Federation law much of the time. He grumbles about how regulations often stand in his way, preventing him from doing what he feels is necessary, but he also doesn't always care about doing what the Bajorans think is right. The Federation is attempting to push for Bajor to join the Federation, and so Sisko has been ordered to attempt to persuade the provisional government to lean in favor of joining once it meets the requirements for entry. Starfleet is present to help fend off the Cardassians, but their interest is in making Bajor a member. Bajor, meanwhile, is more concerned about rebuilding and regaining its identity after 50 years of oppressive Cardassian rule. Their culture and people have been so ruthlessly attacked by the Cardassians that Bajor needs time to heal not only the physical scars across its people and planet, but the spiritual damage caused by living under such conditions. The Federation, to them, is a useful ally for the moment, but they have no real desire to have their independence taken from them so soon after regaining it. Major Kira, then, is in the awkward position of having to work with people she ultimately doesn't want to have around, and who have a very poor understanding of her culture, spirituality, and political situation. The dynamic between the Federation and Bajor is what leads us to what this show is so skeptical about with regard to the Federation and its principles. See, the Federation in this scenario is kind of acting as an imperial power. Star Trek has been aware of the colonial and imperial aspects of its narrative for a long time. Space is referred to as the final frontier, a vast, empty expanse waiting for people to explore it. The rhetoric of the frontier and exploration is, of course, how much colonial expansion in our history has been discussed. Africa and America have been described many times by colonizing powers, both historically and in the modern day, as being vast expanses of open, unoccupied land, ripe for exploration. Much of the global south, the so-called undeveloped and developing nations, are also often thought of as areas ripe with opportunity, unconquered territory. This rhetoric is directly echoed in both the original series and TNG. There's even a lot of throwaway dialogue about settling and colonizing planets. Many occupied planets are colonies, places that were empty of inhabitants and available for use. In an attempt to address these concerns within the fiction of the show, the Prime Directive was created, Starfleet's Order No. 1. This directive states, in brief, that Starfleet officers are, under no circumstances, to interfere in the cultural development of other species. This is to hopefully prevent repeating what might be somewhat generously described as the mistakes of our ancestors, interfering in the affairs of other cultures, even if well-intentioned, and ending up causing irreparable harm. This itself is a somewhat whitewashed understanding of colonialism. European settlers committing genocide wasn't an accident, and they were far from well-intentioned, but within the fiction of the franchise, it's reasonable enough. Starfleet officers, who would mostly be well-intentioned and principled, might feel a need to interfere in the affairs of less technologically or culturally advanced species, and unintentionally cause harm due to the inherent power dynamics present. There's an episode of TNG about this, where undercover agents are sent to investigate what Starfleet terms a pre-warp civilization. Here, Commander Riker is injured while undercover, and attempts to locate him necessitate that Picard reveal himself to political leaders and ask their help. The political leader makes it clear that it's difficult to trust Picard due to the power dynamic present between them. Any action, no matter how well-intentioned, can only be interpreted with this power dynamic in mind. Even the sincere and good-natured Picard can't help but read as threatening when he could kill this man and wipe out a city in mere moments, or call a fleet of ships to come invade. The Prime Directive is the attempt by writers for the series to make the Federation read less as an imperial power, imposing its values and beliefs on everyone it encounters. This still happens, but those incidents must be agonized over. The Prime Directive must be kept in mind at all times, and violating it must be a last resort. The Federation cares about freedom, cultural preservation, and individual rights, and so in order to respect those cultures and maintain their freedom from Federation dictum, unless they agree to engage with the Federation on their own terms, they stay out of their way. The original series, and TNG as well, broadly portray this as a mostly adequate, if imperfect, solution. Deep Space Nine is far less optimistic about the Federation's imperial role. The Federation comes to Bajor not merely to offer help, but to attempt to assimilate it, which, even if well-intentioned as a way to help keep the Cardassians from returning, still uses their enormous power as a way to pressure Bajor into submitting to their wishes. The Federation doesn't merely have technological or political conditions for entry, they also require that certain cultural advancements have been made, ones that align with their principles. While the Cardassian occupation may have ended, the Federation is so integral to the Bajorans' ability to maintain their own existence that, in a sense, the Federation has begun their own attempt to colonize Bajor. The first episode of the series introduces us to this skepticism toward the Federation. Commander Sisko is stationed on DS9, met there by Captain Picard, the beloved icon of TNG. Their meeting is anything but pleasant, though. Sisko lost his wife when the Borg attacked, with Picard leading the charge as Locutus, and now he's being assigned to a station in the middle of nowhere with a son he's raising on his own. Here, the show reminds us that the Federation has chosen to largely sweep Picard's time as Locutus under the rug, despite the damage it caused. Fans of TNG will obviously have a lot of sympathy for Picard's position, but Sisko's is also understandable. As far as he's concerned, this man killed his wife, and now he's sitting on the Federation flagship taking orders from him, orders that require him to raise his son alone, far from their home on Earth. Not only that, he's supposed to help convince the Bajorans to join the Federation, to use his position to influence their political decisions. Dr. Bashir's entrance only drives the colonial perspective of the Federation home, as he tells Major Kira that he came to the station to do frontier medicine, language that Kira immediately shuts down. This isn't an open frontier, a vast expanse to be explored. This place is occupied, it has a rich history, and right now it's full of sick, dying, and wounded people who need help. The Federation's perspective is especially revealed by an event that happens after Sisko is assigned to the station. A wormhole is discovered near Bajor, one that seems to lead to the Gamma Quadrant, a part of the galaxy that would take at least a lifetime to reach, even at warp speeds. It should be noted, this wormhole is mostly seen as an opportunity for further exploration, once again reinforcing the colonial perspective of the Federation. Sisko investigates the wormhole and discovers there are entities living inside it, entities that seem to be the figures in the Bajoran religion called the Prophets. These beings exist outside of our perception of time, and are spoken to in these really cool sequences where they use memories to communicate, speaking through people in semi-random events drawn from the person's mind, which I just love as a creative decision. Conflict arises while Sisko is in the wormhole, speaking to the Prophets, as the Cardassians also sent someone to investigate. The wormhole closed after he entered, and now the Cardassians want to know what happened to him, and are preparing to fire on DS9 if he doesn't return. The Prophets help Sisko deal with the trauma of losing his wife, as he explains linear time and human nature and such, typical Star Trek stuff, and when he exits the wormhole and returns, he's put in a very awkward position. See, the Bajoran religion speaks of the Celestial Temple, the place where the Prophets live, and according to their prophecies, the emissary of the Prophets will enter the temple and have his life returned to him. Sisko has entered the wormhole and begun to deal with the trauma of losing his wife, looking forward instead of back, so he meets the conditions of the prophecy, meaning the Bajorans believe he is a religious icon. This is an incredibly awkward position to be in as a Starfleet officer, since he doesn't believe in their religion, and he's not supposed to be overly involved in their cultural affairs. Unlike Picard and the Enterprise, Sisko can't run away from this situation and the tension inherent to it. This odd position of being both Federation liaison and Bajoran religious icon is something the Federation, and Sisko himself, are a little uneasy with. However, there are multiple episodes in the show where Sisko's superiors explicitly tell him that things would be a lot simpler if the emissary told Bajor that the Prophets wanted them to join the Federation. It would make the process a lot smoother and easier, but of course the Federation could never officially ask him to do such a thing. This reveals something about the Federation that goes against their idealistic depiction in TNG. The Federation has a lot of principles, but the people running things seem to see those more as inconvenient obstacles to achieving their goals, rather than something they believe in and swear to uphold. The best illustration of the Federation's colonialism and imperialism is the Maquis. The Maquis are introduced in DS9 as a group of militant Federation citizens who steal from the Federation and seem intent on attacking their Cardassian neighbors in adjacent systems. Sisko goes to investigate what's going on and deal with the situation as best he can, and the perspective of the Federation citizens is more thoroughly outlined. See, these people have settled in this region of space, but due to high-level diplomatic and political negotiations on the part of the Federation, are now officially living in Cardassian space, not Federation territory. These people had no say in these decisions. All they were told was that they could either leave their homes and their lives, or stay and live under Cardassian rule. The Maquis formed from these discontent citizens, whose homes were traded to their Cardassians without their consultation or consent. These people just want to keep the homes and communities they've built, despite whatever lines may have been drawn on maps by politicians. This tension is compounded by rumors that the Cardassian colonies they're fighting with are being armed by the Cardassian Central Command, their military government. Sisko is sympathetic to the Maquis, but ultimately disagrees with their methods, and chooses to fight them. They become recurring antagonists throughout the series, and feature in TNG and Voyager as well. The Maquis take extreme actions at times, they're classified as terrorists, but their struggle is one that it's hard not to sympathize with. However, unlike how in TNG we might find rogue Federation citizens and work through their issues toward a peaceful solution, we don't get a resolution of this conflict between the Federation and the Maquis. The Federation refuses to go back on the treaty, and hunts down the Maquis, despite them never doing any harm to the Federation, and the Maquis will fight as long as their homes are considered to be under Cardassian rule. It's hard to see this and not think about how indigenous peoples were treated during European colonization of the Americas, their lands being taken from them without their consent, and all attempts at regaining them, or simply fighting back, labeled as terrorism done by the quote-unquote savage natives, who have no respect for law and order. Voyager recognizes this parallel and casts the leader of the Maquis crew as a Native American, something that is handled very poorly due to their expert on indigenous culture being a complete fraud, but I appreciate that they at least noticed the parallel and tried to call attention to it. There are also parallels to how many nations in the global south are often seen by capitalist imperial powers. Territory is traded to maintain their monopolistic power over these regions of space. Conquest is no longer necessary when virtually the entire quadrant has already been divided up into claimed territories. All these powers do now is agree to divisions of territory to maintain their monopoly. There are dissimilarities between these things we could squabble over. I don't want to be overly simplistic about this, but I think the broad strokes are revealing of how DS9 frames the Federation as a political entity in the Star Trek universe. When you take a minute and sit still in one spot, you start to see how the Federation actually affects things within this region of space. The Federation's attempts to keep the peace and remain a disinterested third party reveal a deep undercurrent of injustice permeating its entirety, the genocides they permit, the people whose homes are lost, and the methods that don't make it into the reports. DS9, in its later seasons, adds one final confounding factor onto the idealistic understanding of the Federation that its predecessors held up. It's revealed that the Federation, at its initial founding, established an autonomous law enforcement and intelligence agency, of which there are no records, named Section 31. The organization operates as the Federation's secret police force, akin to the Romulan Tal Shiar or Cardassian Obsidian Order. Its agents are unknown, its methods extra-legal, and its judgment unquestionable. They answer to no one, report to no one, and can do whatever they feel is necessary to protect Federation interests, unconcerned by legalities, bureaucracy, or principle. The Federation, an entity that prides itself on its dedication to its principles, has, all this time, been having its cake and eating it too. It espouses individual rights and respect for other nations and cultures, but since its founding has employed agents who respect none of them. They kidnap citizens with no due process, and are capable of holding them indefinitely or even executing them. They use psychological torture tactics similar to those of the CIA to coerce confessions from people, and they operate in the utmost secrecy with the quiet approval of Starfleet.
We're on the same team. We believe in the same principles that every other Federation citizen holds dear, and yet you violate those principles as a matter of course in order to protect them. Oh, I'm sorry, but the ends don't always justify the means. Really?
DS9 takes this opportunity to help illustrate the ways that the Federation wasn't simply colonial in origin, but has never stopped being an imperial power. Much like the modern United States, the Federation espouses principles of freedom and individual liberty, but has no qualms ignoring those principles when it maintains their interests. The United States has demonstrably upset multiple governments in the name of spreading democracy. The FBI has attempted to, and occasionally succeeded in, assassinating people who promote civil disobedience in the face of societal injustice, and activists are frequently taken into police custody, either without cause, on trumped-up charges, or for participating in non-state-approved protests. Where TNG shows us the heights of what humans are capable of, DS9 shows us the consequences that idealistic vision often ignores. Maintaining peace and delivering justice are not always the same thing, and while TNG focuses on the politics and ethics in an ideal world, DS9 takes a moment to go street level. One of the things that initially made me uncomfortable watching DS9 after having seen TNG was how these conflicts in each episode weren't really resolved how I wanted them to be. TNG had gotten me used to the idea that there was supposed to be an answer to the questions each episode presented. DS9 portrays the messy reality where answers are complicated, flawed, and difficult.
I lied. I cheated. I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men. I am an accessory to murder, but the most damning thing of all, I think I can live with it.
TNG showed me a future I could believe in, but DS9 did its best to show the cracks in that fantasy, the assumptions that went unacknowledged, and the people whose voices were never heard. The Federation's colonial and imperial position is an uncomfortable reality to live with, but it helps ignorant white people like me come to terms with the fact that the world we want to see isn't necessarily the world we actually live in. I live in a country that was founded through genocide and theft of indigenous land, and which is maintained by oppressive institutions that quash dissent at home and abroad through propaganda and violence. It's branded as a bastion of liberty. The idea of succeeding despite the odds is literally called the American dream. But for indigenous people whose ancestors had their traditional land stolen, and black people whose ancestors were brought here as slaves, that sentiment couldn't ring more hollow. They are frequent victims of state violence, as the government attempts to take away the scraps of land they've left for indigenous peoples to live on. Black people are criminalized and incarcerated at alarming rates, and both groups are frequent victims of police brutality. Star Trek is a universe meant to show us the best that humans can achieve, what we're capable of when injustices and material inequalities are made meaningless. But Deep Space Nine reveals the extent to which this is a fantasy unwittingly built for white settlers. The Federation espouses high-minded ideals, and people in elite positions might even believe in them. But without acknowledging and working to combat the injustices at the foundation of our society, we can't expect to achieve those lofty dreams. What Deep Space Nine shows us is what our future will be if we attempt to ignore that history, how those systems of oppression will only be reproduced if we don't tackle them head-on. Earth, much like modern-day quote-unquote developed countries, didn't eradicate poverty or injustice, it just relocated them, tucked them away out of sight, and reaped the benefits of their continued existence. TNG is my favorite Star Trek show, and probably my favorite show in general, because the world it presents is one that I want to believe in. The world we live in sucks in a lot of ways, and I think having a future you want to work toward that you can visualize helps prevent you from getting stuck in a cycle of depression and frustration. Deep Space Nine made me uncomfortable when I first watched it because it felt like it was ruining that ideal picture, tarnishing it. Now, it's my second favorite Star Trek show, because it helps me remember what not to overlook when picturing that ideal future. Ignorance is the soil in which injustice takes root, and as anyone who's ever done any gardening can tell you, if you don't pull out the roots, it doesn't go away. And on that incredibly pretentious note, thank you for watching. The names on screen right now are my wonderful patrons who help support my work by donating over at patreon.com. If you give as little as $1 over there, you get access to scripts, rough drafts of videos, and some occasional updates on projects and stuff. It's not a lot, but I'm working on it. Thank you to everyone who supports me over there, I greatly appreciate it. For everyone else, thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.